There's a strange frustration in knowing that there are good ideas in your head, thoughts that make perfect sense when they're sitting there privately, fully formed, but the second you try to bring them into the world, through speech, through conversation, through explanation, they collapse, they stumble over themselves, they come out fragmented, awkward, incomplete. And then what happens? People don't judge the quality of the thought you meant to express, they judge what actually came out. And that's brutal, because it creates this quiet assumption that maybe you're just not articulate. Maybe some people are simply born with that gift, that natural smoothness, that ability to speak clearly and confidently, to make their words land exactly where they intend. But think about that for a second. Is that actually true? Or is articulation something far less magical and far more practical?
Because here's what I've come to believe. Articulation isn't some natural blessing handed out at birth. It's a skill, a very trainable skill. And like most skills, the reason most people struggle with it isn't because they lack talent, it's because no one ever really taught them how to develop it. School certainly doesn't teach it. College doesn't teach it. We spend years learning formulas, dates, theories, and almost no time learning how to take what's in our minds and translate it into clear, deliberate speech. I know that frustration well. I hated school presentations, absolutely dreaded them. Meeting new people felt awkward because I was constantly second-guessing how I sounded. I always felt uncomfortable because I knew my speech was clunky. I could hear it. I could feel the hesitation, the awkward pacing, the moments where my mouth outran my thoughts. And that's an unsettling experience, because you know there's more clarity inside you than what's making it out.
But over years of speaking, practicing, fumbling, correcting, trying again, I started noticing certain patterns, small techniques that over time fundamentally changed the way I communicate. Some of them are immediate, things you could apply today. Others require deeper rewiring, changes in how you think before you ever speak. And one of them, well, it's a little strange, but it might be the most powerful of all. The first is this: you have to learn to tolerate silence. Now that sounds almost absurdly simple, but think about what happens in conversation. Someone asks you a question, there's a pause, everyone's looking at you, and suddenly there's this pressure, isn't there? This invisible force demanding that you fill the gap immediately. Say something, anything, just respond. And so most people do. They begin speaking before they've actually thought. Their mouth starts moving faster than their mind can organize itself, and suddenly they're improvising in real time, grabbing for ideas, patching together half-formed thoughts. And because of that, they sound uncertain, even when they actually know what they're talking about. That's the tragedy of it. It's not that you lack understanding, you simply haven't given yourself the time required to access it. So what changed things for me was becoming comfortable with that pause, letting silence exist, just sitting there for a moment in thinking. And yes, at first it feels awkward, painfully awkward. You feel like everyone is waiting for you to perform. But here's the strange thing. That discomfort is mostly happening in your own head. And if it still feels unbearable, there are ways around it. Sometimes I'll just say, "Give me a second to think about that." Simple. And what's fascinating is how that transforms the moment. The silence is no longer awkward because now it has purpose. In fact, it often communicates something valuable, that you're taking the conversation seriously enough to think before responding.
There's respect in that. Another useful trick is repeating the question back, not mechanically, not like some weird interrogation tactic, but naturally. So what you're really asking is, that buys you time. It also confirms understanding, and often in the process of repeating it, your answer starts forming. And if you genuinely don't know what you think, say that. Think out loud. Walk the person through your reasoning in real time. There's something deeply honest about that. You don't have to pretend certainty. You can arrive at clarity with someone instead of performing it for them. And that connects to something deeper.
A lot of people struggle with articulation, not because they can't speak well, but because they're trying to express conclusions they haven't actually earned. Now, this is where things get controversial, because we live in a culture that pressures everyone to have an opinion on everything, every issue, every debate, every topic. And why? Because the internet rewards immediate reaction. You're expected to have a take instantly. But what if you don't know enough? What if your understanding is shallow? What if your opinion is really just fragments absorbed from social media, headlines, memes, half-remembered conversations? How articulate can you possibly be when speaking about something you haven't truly wrestled with? You can't, because clear speech depends on clear thought, and clear thought depends on understanding. Imagine someone asks me for my position on some complex issue I haven't seriously studied. Could I give an answer? Sure, I could cobble something together, string together enough buzzwords to sound competent, but would it be real? Would it be grounded? No, it would be performance masquerading as understanding. An articulation built on performance always collapses under pressure. There's immense power in simply saying, "I don't know enough about that yet." That's not weakness, that's intellectual discipline, and often the most articulate thing you can say is a thoughtful question, because questions reveal curiosity, and curiosity is what eventually produces genuine understanding. Now, if you want to sharpen that understanding, there's a practical tool that almost nobody uses enough: writing. And yes, I know, the moment people hear journal, they imagine some elaborate aesthetic ritual, perfect notebooks, candles, philosophical reflections at sunrise. Forget all that. This isn't about performance, it's about thought. Writing forces your thinking to slow down. That's the key. Speech is fast, too fast. You can ramble endlessly and barely notice the contradictions in what you're saying, but writing is merciless. It exposes vagueness. It forces precision. The moment you try to put an idea on paper, you discover whether you actually understand it. You notice gaps, weak assumptions, half-formed reasoning. In that process, sharpens your mind, which means when the time comes to speak, your words arrive with structure, because your thoughts already have structure. This is why writing is that important, because writing lets you wrestle with ideas before presenting them. It gives you the opportunity to refine, revise, and clarify. And that's what articulation really is. It's clarity that has been earned through reflection. But here's something most people overlook. You can't reflect if your mind is never quiet. And honestly, this might be one of the biggest hidden reasons people struggle to articulate themselves. We've built lives saturated with noise, constant stimulation, music, podcasts, scrolling, videos, notifications, always input, always consumption. And if your mind is perpetually occupied by external voices, when does your own voice get a chance to emerge? Think about why people have shower thoughts. Why there? Because for many people, it's the only moment of uninterrupted silence they experience all day. That's revealing. It means your mind needs stillness to synthesize, to process, to connect ideas, to develop depth. Without silence, thought remains fragmented, and fragmented thought produces fragmented speech. So create spaces where nothing is happening. Sit with a coffee and stare out the window. Walk without headphones. Drive without turning anything on. Let your mind wander, because what feels like doing nothing is often the exact condition required for deeper thinking, and deeper thinking produces stronger speech. Now, the final technique. This one's strange, a little uncomfortable, and honestly, maybe the most effective. Talk to yourself. Seriously, speak your thoughts out loud. Why? Because there's a massive difference between thinking you understand something and actually being able to articulate it verbally. You don't really know whether an idea is coherent until you try to say it, and the act of speaking introduces all these variables: pacing, rhythm, pronunciation, emphasis, flow. It's one thing for an idea to feel clear internally. It's another thing entirely to give it shape through language. Talking to yourself bridges that gap. It lets you practice without judgment.
You can stumble, restart, experiment, refine. You can literally hear where your thinking breaks down. Sometimes I'll pace around and explain ideas as if I'm lecturing someone. Sometimes I'll argue both sides of an issue. Sometimes I'll just try to explain something I've learned as clearly as possible. And what happens is fascinating. The act of speaking reveals weaknesses in thought that silent reflection often misses. If talking to thin air feels ridiculous, record yourself. That's even better, because then you can watch it back. Notice your filler words, your pacing, the places where your confidence collapses. And once you can observe those patterns, you can change them. That's the real secret here. Articulation isn't about becoming naturally gifted. It's about building awareness, awareness of your thoughts, awareness of your habits, awareness of the gap between what you mean and what you actually say. And slowly, through silence, deeper knowledge, writing, reflection, and practice, that gap begins to close. So maybe the next time you stumble over your words, don't conclude that you're just bad at speaking. Ask a better question. Ask, have I given this thought enough space to become clear? Because when thought becomes clear, speech tends to follow, and that's worth thinking about.